Hey, what's going on, everyone? Don and Ellie here once again, and thank you for checking out my channel. For today's video, I'm gonna do a little bit deeper dive into my history of the genre, where I, came from, how I got into it, and all that. Um, Although, first of all, I do want to address one small, quick thing real fast. You'll probably notice that 95% of the stuff that I watch, that I do on this here, I'm kind of wearing, like these tank tops and stuff like that. First of all, I live in Southern California. It's, generally 80, 90 degrees out here, and that's kind of like my wardrobe, essentially. Uh, so, uh, get used to that. I think that's pretty much going to be what I wear for the majority of the time, simply because it's Southern California. It's kind of, what I have, it's what I wear, and, it makes me feel comfortable, and, so that's kind of where I am right now with everything. So, yeah, get used to it. But for beyond that, to get into my history of the genre. So, sorry, I came from a Italian, like Roman Catholic family. Most of my family is Italian. We ended up and we had when I was 3 or 4. My grandmother came to live with us, and she stayed with us, and till she died. But it was one of those where she came in so young that a lot of like her values and her beliefs were kind of like imparted onto us. Even though my dad grew up with it. He was part of the her he grew up with that and all that. He wasn't practicing when he met my mom, so it sort of just like dropped off. But then, after I was born and then my sister was born, my grandmother came to live with us, and so it sort of became like it was brought back into our life, into his life especially. So a lot of that was imparted onto me and my sister when we were growing up, and it sort of became part of a sort of like our teaching, like growing up. Neither of us are really religious. We sort of taken after my parents in that we're not really spiritual or like really religious, but we're kind of like we believe in all that, and we follow it. And anyways, the connection with this is that because we were imparted with that at such an early age, the idea of watching horror films and watching what goes on in these films, it was really kind of not necessarily discouraged, but it was very, very, like, very heavily. It's really tough to describe. You didn't want to do it. Basically, there was always this like overrating guilt associated with like not being. We grew up wholesome in a sense, not naive, but just we, like I said, this is like really so hard to describe, and I probably wish I should have done a better job at this. But hey, I'm still new at this, so cut me some slack. I'm sorry. What I'm trying to say is that we kind of grew up based on like like a '60s family sitcom thing, like not necessarily like the Brady Bunch kind of a thing, but like an Andy Griffith kind of a reality. We were always taught to be friendly, respectful, nice. We were never really taught that being this kind of a person, you didn't want to be like this kind of a person that was always kind of like violent or disrespectful or rude or anything like that. So to connect this to the horror films, like that was sort of where it looked like that was what the films were about when I first started getting into movies, just like a little bit younger. because I really got into watching films around maybe, I want to say like around like third, fourth grade. That's another story. But like eight or nine, but like, third or fourth grade's like 8 or 9 ish around there. So it was like not long after like my grandmother moved in with us that I really started like developing an interest in movies and film and stuff like that. So because I was exposed to film and I was like wanting to like see everything involved in it, like when it came to looking at horror films, the idea was always, violence and gore and sort of like when you look at like I remember this specifically because I remember going through the video stores and I remember seeing, covers for Demons, and I remember seeing the cover for Evil Ed, especially. That was a big one. The one where the guy's head gets split open and you see like the maniacal axe and the guy swinging the axe and all that. I remember that one specifically. Let's see here. There was Dead Alive was another big one. The Peter Jackson film Dead Alive with the, she's pulling her mouth apart and you see like the skull in her mouth and all that. But the idea was essentially that, you see these covers in the video store and you see, like common phrases or wording on the covers. You see, bloodbath and massacre and, blood-soaked rampage, or, demons here to chill your spine and rip your soul apart, or, phrases like that, or, something similar. And it just sort of enhanced or reinforced, I think would be a better term. Really like reinforced like what was, like being taught at us, because, your grandmother is still there, your parents are still around, very heavily in your life at that time. And you really sort of like understand where like you're coming from when you don't have like any kind of, not like a background in what's going on, but more like you just have like a one-sided view of everything. Because, my parents, they're not horror fans. They're not really much of movie fans. Basically, ever since they retired, they've sort of developed more of an interest in movies, but even that's more just, Lifetime, Hallmark Channel stuff. Not really interesting or important to the conversation, but the idea is that they didn't have like a really heavy like interest in what I was doing. So as long as, like what I was watching and what I was doing was, in tone to what they were teaching me, like they were fine with it. But the thing is that, watching horror films and getting the idea that all they were about was just, nonstop blood and guts and just, something that I really shouldn't be watching, it just sort of like pushed my interest away from it to a point where I wasn't really, like that concerned with watching it or that interested in watching it. So it finally took until I was in my teens by then, probably like around 14, 15, and I, we moved past, the video store and we decided to get cable, and, the idea was, we finally get to having, a bigger selection of films, because it was always, Friday night at the video store, we'd go rent movies and stuff like that. So, having movies at a much more expansive scale, I guess, it was sort of where, I noticed that a lot of what I was watching was a lot more violent, a lot more hardcore, a lot more free and easy with, blood and guts and gore and, bloodshed and stuff like that. So I remember specifically one month we were watching, and on TV, I noticed that there was Predator, RoboCop, Aliens, Alien 1 and 2, Aliens 1 and 2, Blade, and Starship Troopers. I remember seeing all of those on cable TV within like the span of a month. And it was a situation where I had seen these like uncut and uncensored for the first time. So it was sort of this weird thing where, I've seen all these movies and I've seen everything that goes on in here. Where's, like, I'm not noticing anything. Like, I'd always put off watching these films because I always thought that I would be affected by watching this. Like what my grandparents had told me, you don't want to watch these stuff, you're not going to be, you're going to be different after watching it. You don't want to become that kind of a person that, does these sorts of actions. But yet after watching them, and especially after watching, all of these, like hardcore action, sci-fi, whatever you want to call them, all these, hyper-violent, bloody films, I really wasn't that different. I didn't notice anything, like, different about myself. I didn't notice anything that I was really affected by it. It was always, the idea was, in most of those cases, I really loved the film. So that was, like, the big thing. But the other thing was that, okay, it was a fun experience, but I'm not, like, interested in going out and, like, the old thing of, being inspired by that or being influenced by that. I mean, not to, like, get, like, too psychological or anything on here. I mean, that's not what I'm about. But it didn't feel like I was really interested in doing that. I'm not going to go out and I'm not going to, don a camouflage suit and, go hide and run in the jungle and shoot people with laser guns. I'm not going to go out into outer space and, look like this giant, malformed alien and, rip people apart with a tail or anything. I'm not going to be this, vampire, dress up in fangs and go rip people apart and slice them up with swords or anything like that. I never really got any idea that I was supposed to be influenced by this. It was just always sort of like, wow, that was fun. And that was always like my attitude that I got after watching it, was that, I enjoyed watching it. Like, I mean, not necessarily in a sense that I was, like I said, like replicating it or like playing that sort of a role, but it was always, that was enjoyable. I kind of, liked it. Like the film was fun. And, okay, yeah, it was gory and violent and bloody and all that, but, the film was still fun and I enjoyed it. So it wasn't always like, why did I waste my time watching it? And so it just sort of made me question, like, okay, if I'm watching these kinds of a movie where it's not about how, bloody or violent or gory it is, but it's, there's other things going on, but, like, that was sort of like, okay, the violent stuff, like, that was always, like, the questionable things that was going on. Like, why am I not doing that with horror? And, like, like, violent films specifically, because, like, that was always kind of where I was, like, I watched, like I said earlier, like, I was sort of, like, reinforced, like, what my parents had taught me. Like, why am I not doing that with horror films if I'm fine with this? Like, there should be, like, no real difference between the two. So, at that point, it was sort of like, well, why don't I just see what they're about? I mean, at that, I've never actually seen one. So, it was sort of like, okay, let's give it a shot. And so, I set out and I was like, okay, well, let's, go find a horror film to watch. Now, luckily at that point, it was pretty close to Halloween, so I figured, okay, well, it's going to be kind of easy, just turn the TV on and find something to watch. And so at that point, I think the first film I ever saw was the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I really want to be clear about this when I say, when I sat down to watch it, okay, yeah, I was expecting a Chainsaw Massacre. Stupid me, idiot teenager just watching a movie just for the sake of gore. So when I remember when I sat down to watch it, I remember not liking it at all. Like it was one of the first times where I ever remember sitting down watching a film and being like, okay, well that's not really that interesting. Now I do remember specifically, and I do remember this, that I remember Leatherface chasing Sally through the woods. And I remember this specifically because it was like the first time where I ever really thought, okay, this is interesting. Like, okay, I like where this is going. And it was one of the first few times in the film where I really like popped up and I was really interested in it kept my attention basically. So as the film went on and we're past that, we get the dinner scene and all that, I remember just it fell back into like the earlier scene where I wasn't really interested in what was going on. So when the movie was over, I remember not being that impressed with it. Like, okay, where's all the bloodshed? Where's all the gore? Where's the chainsaw? And, I was like, this was like what I was afraid of, really? So I was like, okay, I've seen enough action movies and I've seen enough, other kinds of films to know, maybe that one just didn't work for me. Maybe something else will work. So I went around and I looked on TV and I remember picking out a couple of other films, but unfortunately I don't remember the names of them. So I can't really say anything specifically what they were. I don't remember much. All I remember is that the next few films I watched, I really, it was like the same thing. Like I wasn't really interested in them. I wasn't really excited, or it wasn't like, it didn't draw me in like I had like the other films I was watching at the time. So I sort of just like kind of like pushed it away and it was like, okay, well maybe, I'm fine with it, but it's not something that I would be interested in. So it took me a while and I kind of like pushed them aside. And it wasn't until Bride of Chucky came out. And for whatever reason, I have no idea why, when I first saw the trailer, I was hooked. Like, there was just something about it that I wanted to see it and I wanted to watch it. And I couldn't go to the theater, obviously. I'm still a teenager. There's no way I'm going to, 14, 15 years old, I'm not going to sneak into a film, an R-rated film like that. So again, I had to wait until it came to cable. And by the time it finally did, this was, like later the year, so like 98-ish, I think. Yeah, the film came out in, the film came out in 98, and then, like later the year it came out onto, Stars or something like that. So I remember sitting down and I remember like getting the chance to watch it and I was like, whoa. Like this was what I was really wanting. This was something that I was really hoping for. That's sort of like where my mindset was and where I was really interested in what was going on. So that was when I first was like, okay, maybe there's something here. Maybe, like I did it wrong. Like I didn't just, I just picked like random stuff. Like it wasn't anything that was like seriously researched and educated and stuff like that. Like I just went into it like, okay, like what's a horror film on TV, and like, this is the first thing that's airing. It's on a channel I have. I'll watch it. Like I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna get something else and something interesting, and I'm gonna go for it with a little bit more. We go into it like a little bit better game plan essentially, and by the time I finally got into, like looking up and what was like, the films I should look at and the films I should watch, that was sort of where I got like a better idea of like what to expect and to get like a better idea of like, okay, like these are the kind of films that are like I should be watching. And I'm trying to remember like the actual, because there's like a group of films that I have that I call the 90s. And this was sort of like the films I watched that like the horror films that got me into the genre. And it would be, well, like I said, Texas Chainsaw and Bride of Chucky. But shortly after that, I saw the first Friday the 13th, the first two Halloweens, because I remember watching the first two really close to each other. The It wasn't the first Nightmare on Elm Street, but it was New Nightmare. New Nightmare was one that I caught really early on, and it was like it was like right around that area when I really saw everything. So I got the first two Screams because I had the first two on VHS. I actually remember I actually remember buying the first two Screams on VHS, and those were the first. Those are like the first horror films that I actually bought with my own money. It wasn't the first movie I ever bought with my own money, but it was the first horror films I bought with my own money because I remember seeing them like on clearance at a VHS, in like the VHS aisle, and they were on like a clearance and something. So I remember buying those, and I remember buying the first two Screams on VHS. But I also remember watching The Omen. The Omen was another really big film that was early on. And I want to say it was, and I'm trying to remember this, it was either Carrie or Candyman. And I only remember this because I remember it was a CA film, and I'm going back like nearly 20 years on this, so like my memory's not really that sharp. But it was either Candyman or Carrie, and I remember watching one of those really early on. I mean, kind of weird, like there's nothing really that similar about them, but like Candyman and Carrie were like the first few films I saw, and like with the other films, like I consider that my 90s. Now, I also do want to throw in three other films in addition to those. I want to throw in Blade. I want to throw in Jaws. And I want to throw in Deep Rising. Now, I want to throw those three in because at the time I saw them, I didn't consider them horror films. Like Blade was an influential film into getting me, like, crossing me over into getting into, like, the violent gore and stuff like that. But the other two films, Jaws and Deep Rising, I saw those early on, and they were sort of like, like, I considered them action films, not horror. But over time, I've sort of changed my thoughts, and I've seen more, and I've gotten more of a feel on how like what the genre is and what it's about and all that. So I've gotten like a better idea of like I can tell a lot easier like what a genre film is and what it looks like and all that. So those three films, in addition to the other ones I just mentioned, Friday 1, Halloween 1 and 2, New Nightmare, Original Texas Chainsaw, Bride of Chucky, The Omen, Scream 1 and 2, and The Omen. All of those I consider the 90s films. Those were all the films that I saw, like early on that got me really interested in what the genre was and what it was about. And it was one of those where I like developed, like I saw like where, like what you could do with it. Like okay, when like I was interested in action films growing up. Like there was certain styles. I noticed, you had Jackie Chan and Jet Li. I still remember watching a lot of the Shaw Brothers stuff. Like you had Kung Fu, martial arts. And with Jackie Chan, you had, comedy stuff. You had, the Schwarzenegger, the Stallone, the Lundgren, just, over the top shootouts. You had, there was like, military, like war movies. You had, like undercover on the run kind of films. You had, you had like various styles, and there was like, you could do like various things within the genre. And looking at all, like looking at the early horror films and where I came from, essentially, it was sort of like, okay, like you can do this with the genre, you can do that with the genre, you can do vampires, you can do werewolves, you can do ghost movies, you can do haunted houses, you can do slashers, you can do zombies. And it really was one of the areas where I saw like all of the potential avenues that I could go down, and it just like I saw everything, and I was like, let's go into it, let's see what it's about, and it just developed from there. And seeing, like I think the fact that the second go round I saw like good stuff, it was one of those where, okay, like I've seen good, let's, okay, maybe there's, like a clunker here or there, like maybe there's something that I don't like, like the original Texas Chainsaw, like even though, I've come around to it now and I like it a lot more than I did back then. Like, I'm still at that point. Okay, I'm not necessarily a huge fan, but okay, just because I don't like the original Texas Chainsaw, let's see if there's anything else out there. Like maybe that one's just not for me. Maybe there's others out there that I like more. And that sort of mindset's been with me now, sort of ever since. Like, okay, just because I don't like one doesn't mean that I have to throw the entire thing away. And that was like an idea that I really had like growing up, where like I had to like everything. Like, if I'm into it, I have to like everything. And it's like, no, you can dislike stuff and still be a fan. And being interested in what was presented at that age, like that's sort of how I've come to the genre ever since. So, like, I can tell I'm rambling here, and it's getting kind of long. Like this is approaching half an hour now, so I'm not going to take up too much more of your time. But like I just really wanted to like to give like an early history to like where I came from with the genre, like how I became a horror fan, and like my early experiences with it. So if like anybody else out there that you have like a similar story where you sort of developed like a tolerance or an interest in it later on after, like like if any of that story resonates with anyone, like talk to me, and I'd love to like I'd love to meet anybody else out there like that grew up where you were sort of like hesitant to try it, and then you got into it later on and you realized like, wow, like what was I missing? Like talk to me, let me know. Like I'd love to talk to anybody because I've never really met anyone that was similar, that had like a similar background. If you want to call me an idiot for like being so hesitant, like hey, that's me. I'm like that. I just wanted to, share my story and like get it out there for everyone. So, I'll just leave it here. If you want to, follow me on here, I'd love to like keep making more videos for you guys. If you want to follow me on my regular writings, you can do so. There's a link down below that you can find my writing. You can find it at donshorrorworld.blogspot.com, where I do reviews, write-ups, roundups, interviews, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, thanks for watching, and see you guys next time.